The hospital lobby was quiet at 6:47 p.m., the kind of quiet that comes right before something breaks. Sarah Mitchell stood behind the intake desk badge, slightly crooked coffee growing cold beside her keyboard. Nobody looked at her twice. She was the nurse who filed paperwork, who spoke softly to frightened families, who never raised her voice. Then the doors slammed open. A man in a torn jacket walked in gripping a pistol, dragging a wounded accomplice behind him, shouting for a doctor who would not ask questions. Security froze. A guard's hand hovered uselessly near his radio. Patients dropped to the floor. Somewhere behind the chaos, Sarah did not move. She watched, calm, calculating, the way someone watches a variable before they decide how to solve it. She had spent 3 years answering to ma'am in this lobby. Tonight, before the sun rose again, someone else would be answering to her. Riverside General Hospital sat on the edge of downtown, the kind of building people passed 1,000 times without truly seeing. Its lobby smelled of antiseptic and burnt coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, steady and indifferent the way they had for 11 years. Sarah Mitchell arrived at 6:15 a.m. as she always did, badge clipped, slightly crooked to her scrubs, hair pulled back without ceremony, a travel mug of black coffee in one hand. She moved through the halls without drawing attention, greeting the night shift security guard with a small nod, checking the intake board before anyone asked her to. To the staff of Riverside General, she was simply the quiet one, reliable, efficient. The nurse who remembered which patients needed extra blankets and which doctors needed their coffee black, no sugar. She rarely spoke in meetings. She rarely needed to. Dr. Holloway, the ER's senior attending, liked to joke that Sarah could disarm a difficult patient with nothing but a calm voice and steady eyes. He meant it as a compliment about bedside manner. He had no idea how literal the word disarm might once have been in her life. That morning, a man in his 60s was wheeled in from a car accident, disoriented and combative, swinging weakly at anyone who came near. 2 orderlies hesitated at the doorway, unsure how to approach him safely. Sarah walked in without hurry. She didn't raise her voice. She simply positioned herself at an angle he couldn't easily reach, spoke his name softly, and waited for his eyes to find hers. "You're safe. You're at the hospital. I need you to breathe with me," she said, matching her breathing to his, deliberately slow. Within a minute, his shoulders dropped. His fists uncurled. The room exhaled with him. "Nice work," Dr. Holloway said afterward, already moving to the next chart. "You've got a gift for calming people down." Sarah offered a small, polite smile and said nothing else. She didn't correct him. She didn't explain that what he'd witnessed wasn't a gift, it was training. The kind of training that taught you to read a threat's center of gravity before they knew they had one, to control a room by controlling your own breathing first. She had learned it somewhere far from hospital corridors, in places she never spoke about, under a name that no longer appeared on any badge she wore. At lunch, she sat alone in the break room, half listening to 2 younger nurses debate whether the new intake system was actually faster. She ate quickly, economically, the way people eat when meals were once uncertain and irregular. Nobody noticed that she always chose the seat facing the door. By mid-afternoon, an administrator stopped by to remind staff about a hospital safety drill scheduled for the following month. Evacuation routes, lockdown protocol, the usual. Most nurses nodded absently, already thinking about their next task. Sarah listened closely, memorizing exits, choke points, blind corners, the way another person might memorize a grocery list. It was reflex, not paranoia. She had simply never learned how to stop preparing for the worst. At 6:45 p.m., as her shift wound toward its end, she checked the lobby one last time before heading to the staff lounge. Patients waited quietly. A janitor mopped near the entrance. The automatic doors slid open and closed with their familiar sigh. Nothing about the evening suggested it would be any different from the 1,000 evenings before it. Sarah had no way of knowing that in exactly 2 minutes, everything about that assumption would be wrong. The first sign was small enough that anyone else would have missed it. A man stood near the ambulance bay entrance, hands buried in the pockets of a jacket too heavy for the mild evening. He wasn't waiting for anyone. He wasn't checking his phone or pacing the way nervous relatives did. He simply stood, still and watchful, his eyes tracking the rhythm of the hospital's comings and goings, which doors opened without a badge, which hallways emptied fastest, how long security took to notice a stranger loitering. Sarah clocked him from across the parking lot as she carried a stack of files toward the side entrance. She didn't stop walking. She didn't change her pace. But some old, quiet part of her mind, a part that had never fully gone dormant, filed him away. Weight distribution uneven. right side heavier. Something under the jacket. She told herself it was nothing. People loitered outside hospitals all the time. Smokers, drivers waiting on family, exhausted visitors catching their breath. But the detail that stayed with her wasn't his stillness. It was his eyes. He wasn't looking at the building. He was counting it. Back inside, she mentioned it to Marcus, the night security guard, in the same tone she'd used to note a spill in exam room 4. "There's a guy by the ambulance bay. Been there almost 15 minutes. Might be worth a look." Marcus glanced at the monitor showing the exterior camera feed, squinting at the grainy image. Probably waiting on a ride. "We get a dozen guys like that a night." He said it kindly, not dismissively. Just the tired shorthand of someone who'd seen 1,000 nights pass without incident. Sarah didn't push. She had learned long ago that over-explaining a hunch only made people trust it less. Instead, she quietly adjusted her own habits, checked the ambulance bay camera twice more over the next hour, made sure the side door's badge reader was functioning, noted which exits remained unlocked during shift change. Small, invisible corrections. The kind of vigilance that left no trace unless something went wrong. At 6:30, the man was gone from the bay. Sarah exhaled, almost convincing herself she'd overreacted. Then, 20 minutes later, a delivery driver mentioned offhand to the front desk clerk that a black sedan had been parked oddly close to the emergency entrance for nearly an hour. Engine running, 2 men inside. The clerk laughed it off. Probably lost. Sarah, refilling a supply cart nearby, heard it and felt the old familiar tightening low in her chest. Not fear exactly, recognition. She checked her watch. It's 4:44 p.m. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself the drill briefing that afternoon had simply put security on her mind. She told herself a lot of things in the next 3 minutes, and none of them mattered, because at 6:47 p.m., the doors to the lobby didn't slide open with their usual gentle sigh. They were shoved open. The doors didn't just open. They slammed against the rubber stoppers with a crack that silenced the lobby instantly. A man burst through first, his jacket flapping open to reveal a pistol clenched in his right hand. He was breathing hard, sweat darkening his collar, eyes wide with the particular panic of someone whose plan had already started falling apart. Behind him, a second man staggered in, one arm slung over the first man's shoulder, the other pressed against a wound low on his side. Blood soaked through his shirt in a dark, spreading stain. "I need a doctor, now," the armed man shouted, swinging the gun in a wide arc across the room. Nobody moves. Nobody touches a phone. For a heartbeat, the lobby simply froze. An elderly woman in a wheelchair gasped and covered her mouth. A young father instinctively pulled his daughter behind his legs. The front desk clerk's hand hovered over the phone before she caught herself, terrified to even complete the motion. Marcus, the security guard, took one step forward, hand rising toward his radio, and the gunman's aim swung directly onto him. "Don't," the gunman said, voice cracking with adrenaline. "Don't you dare." Marcus stopped. His hands rose slowly, palms open. It was the only right decision available to him, and Sarah, standing near the supply cart at the edge of the lobby, watched him make it with something like relief. Good. No heroics. Not yet. She did not run. She did not scream. While the rest of the lobby dissolved into frightened stillness, the particular silence of people trying to become invisible, Sarah's mind moved with a clarity that felt almost separate from her body. A switch flipped somewhere she rarely accessed anymore. Two visible. One armed, panicking finger near the trigger guard, not on it, untrained or restrained. One wounded, blood loss moderate, femoral proximity unclear. Exits. Main doors blocked by position, side corridor to radiology open, ambulance bay accessible if lobby empties toward North Hall. She kept her hands visible, her posture small and unthreatening, the universal language of "I am not a problem." It was the same stillness she'd used to calm a combative patient that morning, except now the stakes wore a very different face. The armed man's eyes swept the room and landed finally on the reception desk, and then on the hallway signs pointing toward the ER. Somebody get a doctor. He's losing too much blood. Anybody moves for that phone, moves for that door, I put a bullet in the first person I see. You hear me? Silence answered him. Nobody hearing him doubted he meant it. Sarah watched the wounded man's knees buckle slightly, watched the way the armed man's arm strained to keep him upright. Protective, not merely functional. Not strangers. Brothers, maybe, or something close to it. That detail mattered. Desperation born from love behaved differently than desperation born from greed. A nurse near the intake desk whimpered, and the armed man's gun swung toward the sound instantly, his whole body coiling tighter. "Easy," Sarah said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room with unexpected weight. Every eye turned toward her. Patients, staff, and finally, the gunman himself, gun swinging in her direction for the first time. She didn't flinch. "I'm a nurse," she said simply, hands still open, voice level as still water. "Let me look at him. He doesn't have long if that wound isn't controlled." The gunman's eyes narrowed, suspicious, searching her face for a trick. For a long moment, nobody in that lobby breathed. Then he gave a single sharp nod. "Move slow," he said. "Real slow." Sarah stepped forward, and the door to whatever came next quietly, irreversibly, closed behind her. Sarah crossed the lobby with slow, deliberate steps, her hands raised just enough to show she carried nothing. The armed man tracked her with the gun the entire way, his finger hovering near the trigger guard, knuckles white around the grip. "That's close enough," he snapped when she was still 6 feet away. "I need to be closer than that to help him," she said, voice even. "Or he bleeds out in the next 10 minutes. Your choice." The wounded man groaned, his head lolling against his brother's shoulder. Because that was what he was. Sarah was almost certain now, watching the way panic and grief tangled together in the armed man's face. Not a hired accomplice. Someone he loved. "Fine," the gunman said, finally, jaw tight. "But you try anything." "I won't," Sarah said. "I want him to live. That's the job." She knelt beside the wounded man, and the moment her hands touched his side, the outside world seemed to recede, replaced by something narrower and more familiar. This, at least, she understood without complication. Blood loss, torn tissue, a body running out of time. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency, pressing gauze from her scrub pocket against the wound, checking his pulse at the wrist, watching his breathing. But beneath the clinical motions, another assessment ran in parallel, quieter, older. Entry wound, lower left abdomen. Bullet, not blade, consistent with a struggle, not an ambush. He's pale, but pulse still strong. 20 minutes, maybe 30, before this becomes unsurvivable without surgery. She glanced up at the armed man without lifting her head fully. "What's his name?" The question caught him off guard. "Why does that matter?" "Because if I'm the one deciding how to keep him breathing, I'd rather not think of him as the wounded man." "What's his name?" A pause. Something in the gunman's shoulders loosened by a fraction. "Danny," he said. "He's my brother." "Danny," Sarah repeated, steady, unhurried, and pressed harder against the wound. Danny hissed through his teeth. "You're doing fine, Danny. Stay with me." While her hands worked, her eyes moved. Not obviously, not in a way that would draw suspicion, but with the trained economy of someone cataloging a room without appearing to look at it at all. She noted the position of the second exit near radiology, unguarded. She noted that the armed man, Danny's brother, kept glancing toward the main doors every few seconds, expecting something. Police, or someone else. She noted, too, that his gun was a revolver, not automatic. 6 rounds, maybe fewer already spent. Older model, not a professional's weapon. A desperate man's weapon. "What's your name?" she asked him quietly, still working. He hesitated, suspicious of the question's purpose. "Why do you care?" "Because right now, you're the only person in this room who can decide whether more people get hurt tonight," Sarah said, not looking up. "That matters more than you think it does." He didn't answer directly, but something in his stance shifted. The gun lowered an inch, unconsciously, as though her calm had physically pressed down on the tension coiled in his arm. "Marcus," she said without turning, pitching her voice just loud enough to reach the guard frozen by the reception desk. "Get me the trauma kit from Bay 2, slowly." Marcus glanced at the gunman, silently asking permission. The armed man's jaw worked for a moment before he gave a short, jerking nod. As Marcus edged toward the supply closet, Sarah kept working, kept talking softly to Danny, kept her voice a steady thread, pulling the room back from the edge of chaos. But underneath the calm, a colder calculation continued uninterrupted, the same one that had once guided her through rooms far more dangerous than this lobby, in a life she had buried under scrubs and quiet Tuesdays. 6 rounds. 1 shooter visibly untrained, protecting family, not ideology. 1 exit unguarded. Backup will come from the east through the ambulance bay in minutes, if they haven't already been alerted. She did not know yet how this night would end. But some old, steady part of her, a part she'd hoped never to need again, had already begun deciding how to make sure it ended without more blood on the floor than necessary. Marcus returned with the trauma kit, moving in slow, exaggerated steps, setting it down within Sarah's reach without coming any closer than he had to. The armed man, Sarah still didn't have his name, watched every inch of the guard's movement, gun tracking him back to the reception desk. "Thank you," Sarah said, already opening the kit, pulling out gauze, saline, a pressure bandage. She worked steadily on Danny's wound, packing it with practiced hands, her voice a low, constant murmur of reassurance that seemed to calm the room as much as the patient. "You're a good nurse," Danny mumbled, eyes fluttering. "I've had practice," she said simply. As she worked, she let her eyes drift, not toward the armed man directly, which would read as suspicious, but past him, toward the doors, toward the reflection in the darkened window behind the reception desk. She could see, faintly, the flicker of blue and red lights pulsing somewhere beyond the parking lot. Police. Early, but not yet close enough to see through the glass. They'll set a perimeter first. No entry until they know what's inside. That gives me time. But it also means nobody's coming through those doors to help. Not yet. She kept her tone light, ordinary, the way she might speak to any anxious family member in a trauma bay. He's stable for now, but he needs a hospital transfusion within the hour, or the blood loss becomes a real problem. I can keep him alive right here, but I can't perform surgery in a lobby. The armed man, she decided to simply call him the brother in her mind, since Danny hadn't offered a name for him either, dragged a hand across his face, the gun dipping slightly as exhaustion began to compete with adrenaline. "They're not letting us just walk out of here," he said, half to himself. "I know that." "No," Sarah agreed, calm and unflinching. "They're not. But how this ends depends a lot on what happens in the next 10 minutes. Not the next 10 hours. He looked at her sharply. "You trying to negotiate with me?" "I'm trying to keep your brother breathing," she said. "Everything else is your decision. But I'll tell you what I see happening outside those doors right now, because you can't see it from here, and I think you'd want to know." He hesitated, then gave a short nod. Some fragile thread of trust forming between them, the particular trust of a man with no good options left, clinging to the one person in the room, not treating him purely as a threat. "Police are setting a perimeter," she said quietly. "They won't rush in. Not with hostages, not with your brother wounded. That means you have time to think, but it also means you're not walking out that front door. Not today." "So what, I just wait here to get arrested?" "You wait here," Sarah said, "and you decide what kind of story gets told about tonight. One where nobody else gets hurt and your brother makes it to surgery. Or one where this ends badly for everyone, including him." While she spoke, her hands never stopped their careful work, checking Danny's pulse, adjusting the pressure bandage, monitoring the color returning faintly to his lips. But her mind ran a second track entirely, colder and more precise, assessing options the brother didn't know existed. If negotiators make contact, they'll want a phone line open. If they don't have eyes inside, I can control what information reaches them. If this goes past 20 minutes, SWAT will consider breach options. I need him disarmed or calm before that happens. She thought briefly of the last time she'd sat this close to a live weapon in an enclosed space. Years ago, in a place far from any hospital, where the stakes had worn a different uniform, but the calculus had been exactly the same. Slow the room down. Buy time. Make yourself the only reasonable voice left. "There's a landline in the office behind the desk," she said, nodding toward it without moving her hands from Danny's side. "If the police call, you'll want to answer it yourself. Shows them someone rational is in control. That matters more than you think." The brother studied her for a long moment, something uncertain and searching in his expression, as though some instinct in him recognized that the calm radiating from this quiet nurse wasn't ordinary bedside manner, even if he couldn't name what it actually was. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. Sarah met his eyes, steady, unreadable. "Right now," she said, "I'm the only person in this room who wants both you and your brother to walk out of here alive. That's who I am." It wasn't a lie. It also wasn't the whole truth. And somewhere behind her calm expression, the old instincts she'd spent years trying to leave behind were already mapping the next 30 minutes with a precision that had nothing to do with nursing at all. The landline rang at 7:03 p.m., shattering the fragile quiet that had settled over the lobby. The brother flinched hard at the sound, gun snapping up toward the noise before he caught himself. Danny stirred weakly at his side, murmuring something incoherent. Sarah didn't move from where she knelt, but her voice cut through the tension immediately. That's them. The police. Answer it, like I said. Stay calm. Keep it short. He hesitated, glancing between the phone and the room full of frightened faces, as if answering might collapse whatever fragile control he still had. Finally, he gestured sharply at the young front desk clerk. You, answer it. Put it on speaker. Don't say anything stupid. The clerk's hands shook as she lifted the receiver, pressing the speaker button with trembling fingers. This is Riverside Hospital lobby, she said, voice cracking. A calm, practiced voice answered. This is Sergeant Reyes, Metro PD. I need to speak with whoever's in charge in there. The brother's jaw tightened. He crossed the distance to the desk in 3 quick strides, snatching the receiver from the clerk's hand. I'm in charge, he said, voice rough. Nobody comes in, nobody, you understand me? I understand, Reyes said evenly. Nobody's coming in right now. I want to make sure everyone stays safe, including you. Can you tell me if anyone's hurt in there? The brother's eyes flicked toward Sarah, who gave the smallest nod. Tell him. My brother's shot. He needs a hospital. A real one, with surgery, not just some nurse patching him up in a lobby. We can arrange medical transport the moment it's safe, Reyes said. But I need something from you first. Some sign of good faith. Can you let the other patients go? The ones not involved in this? Silence stretched over the line. The brother's grip on the phone tightened, knuckles pale. Sarah watched the muscles along his jaw work, watched the arithmetic of fear and desperation churn behind his eyes. No, he said finally. Not yet. Not until I know my brother's going to make it. He slammed the receiver down, chest heaving, and for a moment the entire lobby seemed to hold its breath along with him. That was a mistake, Sarah said quietly, still working on Danny's bandage, not looking up. I don't need advice from a nurse, he snapped. But there was no real heat behind it, just exhaustion wearing through. You do actually, she said. Because right now they think you're unstable and unpredictable. That makes a breach more likely, not less. If you want your brother to survive this, you need them to believe releasing people gets you something. Right now, all they see is a man with nothing to lose. He stared at her, something raw and frightened flickering behind the anger. And what happens to me if I let people go? I still go to prison. He still might die in some ambulance if he doesn't make it in time. Maybe, Sarah admitted. But right now, you're the only variable keeping this from going very wrong very fast. I've seen rooms like this end badly. I've seen them end without anyone dying too. The difference usually comes down to what happens in the next 20 minutes. Something in the way she said it. Flat, certain without a trace of performative sympathy, made him look at her differently, as if reconsidering an assumption he hadn't realized he'd made. Before he could respond, a commotion broke out near the east corridor. A second security guard, panicked and untrained for this kind of pressure, had tried to slip toward the radiology exit with 2 elderly patients in tow. The brother spun, gun rising, shouting for them to stop. The room erupted into fresh screams, patients scrambling away from the noise, chaos threatening to detonate the fragile stillness Sarah had spent the last 20 minutes building. Don't! Sarah's voice rang out, sharp and commanding in a way it hadn't been before, a tone that startled even her, an old register surfacing without permission. Nobody move! Nobody! The room froze, including, for a half second, the brother himself. She turned to him, voice dropping back into its careful calm, though her heart hammered harder than her expression let on. That wasn't a trick. Just people who panicked. You don't want a body on the floor because of a mistake. Let me talk to them. He stared at her for a long, taut moment, gun still trembling slightly in his grip, torn between the adrenaline screaming at him to do something, and the strange, steadying pull of her voice. Do it, he said finally. But if this is a trick, it isn't, Sarah said, already rising slowly, hands still visible, moving carefully toward the frightened guard and the 2 elderly patients frozen mid-flight near the corridor. As she crossed the room, close enough now to reach either exit if the moment called for it, close enough to feel the full weight of how quickly this could still collapse into tragedy, she felt the old clarity settle deeper into her chest. Quiet, controlled, and utterly unwilling to let this night end the way it easily could. Behind her, unseen, red and blue lights multiplied across the parking lot glass, More vehicles. More voices on radios. The perimeter was tightening, and somewhere beyond it, people who once knew exactly who Sarah Mitchell used to be were beginning, without yet realizing it, to close in on the one hospital in the city where she happened to be working tonight. Sarah reached the frightened guard and the two elderly patients just as the brothers' attention snapped back toward Danny, whose breathing had gone shallow and uneven. She crouched beside the guard first, voice low. "You're okay. Get them back toward the waiting area, slow, no sudden movement." "I've got this." The guard nodded, ashen-faced, guiding the trembling patients back into the huddled mass of hostages near the seating area.
Sarah turned to follow, and that was when she saw the little girl.
She was maybe 7 years old, curled against her father's side near the water fountain, face buried in his shirt, small shoulders shaking. Her father held her tightly, whispering something useless and desperate into her hair, the way parents do when they have nothing else to offer. The brother's eyes found them too, and something in his expression, already frayed, already unraveling under the weight of the last 20 minutes, snapped further. "Everyone shut up!" he shouted, voice cracking with a violence that hadn't been there before. He crossed the room in 3 strides, gun swinging toward the father and daughter. "I said shut up. I can't think with all this. Hey." Sarah's voice cut across the room, sharper now, deliberately drawing his focus away from the child. "Look at me." "Not them. Me." He turned, chest heaving, gun still raised, and for one suspended moment, the barrel drifted toward Sarah instead. She didn't step back. "You're scared your brother's going to die," she said, steady despite the weapon now pointed at her chest. "That fear is making you see threats that aren't there. That little girl isn't a threat. She's 7. Let me take her and her father to the corner, out of your way so you can breathe. Don't tell me how to—" "I'm not telling you what to do," Sarah said, quieter now, almost gentle. "I'm telling you what happens if you pull that trigger by accident because your hands are shaking. You don't walk out of here with any chance of seeing your brother again. Not from prison, not anywhere. Is that really what you want for him?" Something in the mention of Danny reached him where nothing else had. His arm wavered, the gun dipping a fraction of an inch. Sarah used the opening. "Let me take them to the corner," she said again, slowly. "That's all." He gave a single, jerking nod, jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. Sarah moved toward the father and daughter, kneeling briefly to meet the girl's eyes. "Hey, you're going to come with me for a second, okay? Hold your dad's hand." The girl nodded, tear-streaked and silent, gripping her father's fingers as Sarah guided them both toward the far corner, putting her own body deliberately between them and the gunman's line of sight. It was in that moment, turned slightly away, attention split between calming the child and tracking the brother's unstable hands, that Danny's condition took its sudden turn. His breathing hitched, then stopped catching air properly, chest rising in short, useless gasps. His skin, already pale, took on a gray undertone that Sarah recognized instantly, even from across the room. Blood loss finally outpacing the body's ability to compensate. "Danny!" the brother shouted, dropping to his knees beside him, gun momentarily forgotten on the floor beside his leg. Sarah didn't hesitate. She crossed the room in seconds, kneeling opposite the brother, hands already moving, checking the airway, checking the pulse, finding it thin and rapid beneath her fingers. "He's going into shock," she said, voice flat and urgent now, all pretense of calm negotiation stripped away by necessity. "I need to elevate his legs, and I need real fluids, an IV line, things I don't have in this lobby." "So do something." The brother's voice cracked, raw with a fear that had nothing left to do with tactics or standoffs, only a brother watching another brother slip away in real time. "I am," Sarah said, positioning Danny's legs on a stack of waiting room cushions, pressing harder against the wound, buying seconds with nothing but pressure and will. "But he needs surgery in the next 15 minutes, or nothing I do here will be enough." The brother's eyes, wild with panic, finally lifted to meet hers, and in them, Sarah saw the exact moment his resolve, the thin thread holding this entire standoff together, began to fray past the point of return. "Then let them in," he said, voice breaking entirely. "Tell them to let a doctor in, please." It was, Sarah understood immediately, both a mercy and a risk. The first true crack in his control and the most dangerous moment yet, because a man that close to collapse could do anything in the next 60 seconds. including things neither of them could take back. Okay, Sarah said, keeping her voice level even as her pulse hammered beneath her calm exterior. Okay, I'm going to call them back. You're going to let a surgical team in, just enough to move him. That's it. Nobody else. The brother nodded, hollowed out, all the fight drained from his face as he looked down at Danny's gray, sweat-slicked skin. Just for him, he whispered. Just to save him. Sarah rose and moved to the landline, lifting the receiver herself this time, dialing back the last number displayed on the caller ID screen. Sergeant Reyes answered on the first ring. This is Sarah Mitchell, nurse inside the lobby, she said, voice steady, clipped, efficient in a way that made Reyes pause on the other end. The wounded male is going into hypovolemic shock. He needs surgical intervention within minutes or he will die. The subject holding the weapon is willing to allow a medical team in, restricted access, one gurney, no weapons visible. He is not looking for a fight. He is looking for his brother to survive. Do you copy? There was a brief silence on the line, the particular silence of someone recalibrating an assumption. Copy, Reyes said slowly. Ma'am, can I ask, have you had negotiation training? Sarah's eyes flicked involuntarily toward the ceiling camera in the corner of the lobby, the one she'd clocked the moment the doors first burst open. Just send the team, Sergeant, fast. She hung up before he could ask anything further. 4 minutes later, the front doors opened again, this time slowly, deliberately, hands visible, exactly as arranged. 2 paramedics in reflective vests wheeled in a gurney, moving with the careful, unhurried pace of people trained not to trigger a frightened man's trigger finger. Sarah guided them to Danny's side, rattling off vitals in short-clipped bursts, blood pressure, respiration, estimated blood loss, the language of someone who had done this under far worse circumstances than a hospital lobby. The brother watched with white-knuckled tension as they lifted Danny onto the gurney, his hand hovering near the gun on the floor but not touching it, some final restraint holding him back from the edge. It was in the chaos of that transfer, paramedics moving fast, Danny's eyes fluttering weakly open, the brother crouched close, whispering something broken and apologetic to him, that the doors opened a second time. This time it wasn't paramedics. A man in a dark tactical vest stepped through, unarmed, hands visible, moving with the unmistakable economy of someone who had walked into 100 rooms like this one and never once needed to raise his voice to control them. Behind him, 2 more agents held position just outside the doorway, weapons lowered but present. Special Agent Coleman, FBI, the man said calmly, addressing the brother directly, ignoring the gun still lying near his feet. Nobody's coming in with weapons raised. We just want your brother to make it to the hospital. That's all that matters right now. The brother's eyes darted between Coleman and the paramedics, wheeling Danny toward the doors, torn between surrender and some final, desperate instinct to bolt. It was Sarah who moved first, stepping calmly into the space between the brother and the agent, her voice quiet but absolute. He's not going to resist. He just needs a minute. Coleman's eyes shifted to her for the first time, and something in his expression changed. A narrowing focus, a flicker of recognition trying to surface through years of distance. He studied her face a beat longer than necessary, the way someone studies a name they can't quite place. Mitchell? He said slowly, almost to himself. The room's tension paused, just slightly, at the strange familiarity in his voice. Sarah didn't answer directly. Let his brother ride with him, she said instead. He needs the officer of the peace beside him, not cuffs first. He'll come quietly. I give you my word. Coleman studied her another long moment, the calm authority in her tone, the exact positioning of her body relative to the exits, the way she'd clearly assessed every angle of this room long before his team arrived, and something clicked into place behind his eyes. Copy, he said quietly, turning to his team. Non-restrictive escort. Let's move. As paramedics wheeled Danny through the doors, the brother following with his hands raised, agents closing gently around him without a hint of aggression, Coleman lingered a moment longer near Sarah, his voice dropping low enough that only she could hear. It's been a long time, Agent Mitchell, he said quietly. Didn't expect to find you in scrubs. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes flickered, old, tired, and unmistakably confirmed. It's just Sarah now, she said softly. Just a nurse. Coleman's faint, knowing smile suggested he understood exactly how untrue, and exactly how true, that sentence really was. The lobby, moments ago a frozen tableau of fear, dissolved into careful, controlled motion. Agents moved through the space with quiet efficiency, guiding shaken patients toward the exits, checking IDs, murmuring reassurances that felt almost foreign after the last half hour of held breath and whispered pleas. Sarah remained near the reception desk, watching the brother, cuffed now but gently, an agent's hand resting on his shoulder rather than gripping his arm, glance back one last time toward the ambulance doors where Danny had disappeared minutes before. "Is he going to make it?" the brother asked, voice hoarse, addressing no one and everyone. "He has a real chance now," Sarah said, stepping close enough to answer him directly, her voice softer than it had been all night. "The surgical team knows exactly what they're dealing with. You gave him that chance the moment you let them in." He looked at her for a long moment, something fractured and grateful passing behind his exhausted eyes. "I don't even know your name," he said. "Sarah," she said simply. "That's all you need to know." An agent guided him gently toward the door, and he went without resistance, his earlier violence replaced now by the hollow, wrung-out compliance of a man who had run out of reasons to fight. Coleman approached again, watching the exchange with quiet interest. "You could have let my team handle that de-escalation," he said. "Standard protocol once we arrived." "Standard protocol would have taken longer," Sarah said. He needed to hear it from someone he'd already decided to trust. "That's not always the person with the badge." Coleman studied her, arms crossed loosely, something like respect settling into his expression. "You haven't lost a step," he said. "Command used to say the same thing about you back then. Fastest read in a room they'd ever seen." Sarah's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "That was a long time ago, Coleman." "Some things don't really go away," he said, not unkindly. "They just find quieter places to live." Around them, the lobby continued its slow return to order, a cleaning crew already dispatched, staff beginning to account for the shaken and the unharmed, the acrid tension of the last hour giving way to something closer to exhausted relief. Dr. Holloway appeared from the ER hallway, having weathered the lockdown with the rest of the medical staff, his eyes widening slightly as he took in the scene. Federal agents, cuffs, the lingering static of adrenaline still hanging in the air. "Sarah," he said, hurrying over. "Are you all right? I heard you were the one that you talked him down, kept the situation from—" "I just did what any nurse would do," Sarah said, deflecting easily. The practiced ease of someone who had spent years redirecting attention away from herself. Kept a patient stable. Kept people calm. That's the job. Holloway glanced toward Coleman, confusion flickering across his face at the unmistakable familiarity between them. "You two know each other?" Coleman opened his mouth, and for a half-second, Sarah's expression tightened, not fear, but the particular tension of someone bracing for a door she'd spent years keeping shut to swing open in front of people who didn't need to see inside. "We've crossed paths," Coleman said instead, something in his tone deliberately vague, almost protective. "A long time ago. Different circumstances. It was," Sarah understood, "a small mercy, the kind offered quietly between people who had once served under the same flag, who understood without needing to say it aloud that some doors were better left closed, even after they'd been forced open by circumstance." Holloway, sensing there was more to the story than either of them intended to share, let the matter drop, though the questioning look in his eyes lingered. "Get some rest, Sarah," Coleman said, turning finally toward the doors, his team already loading the brother into a transport vehicle outside. "And for what it's worth, Danny's got a real shot because of what you did in there tonight. Not just the medicine. All of it." Sarah nodded once, watching him go, watching the flashing lights outside slowly begin to disperse as the scene wound down toward its quiet. Unremarkable conclusion, ambulances pulling away, patients reunited with relieved families, a hospital slowly exhaling after holding its breath for the better part of an hour. She stood alone for a moment amid the returning noise and motion of a lobby resuming its ordinary rhythm, feeling the old, familiar weight settle back over her shoulders, the weight of having done exactly what needed doing, and the quieter, heavier weight of knowing that doing it had cost her the comfortable invisibility she'd built her new life around. The next morning, Riverside General looked exactly as it always had. Fluorescent lights humming their steady, indifferent tune, the smell of antiseptic and burnt coffee drifting from the break room. Patients shuffling through intake with the same tired patience as any other Tuesday. Sarah arrived at 6:15 a.m., badge clipped slightly crooked, travel mug of black coffee in hand. She moved through the lobby without pausing at the spot where, less than 12 hours earlier, a man had bled onto the tile while his brother's hands shook around a revolver. Someone had already cleaned it. The chairs were back in their rows. The world had a way of resetting itself quickly, even when the people inside it hadn't. A few nurses glanced her way as she passed the station. Longer looks than usual, curious, searching. Word had traveled overnight, the way it always did in a building full of people who thrived on shared adrenaline. The quiet nurse, the one who talked him down, the one the FBI agent seemed to know. Sarah. One of the younger nurses, Priya, caught up to her near the supply closet, eyes wide with the particular energy of someone who'd rehearsed a question all night. Is it true? What happened? People are saying you used to be some kind of federal agent or something. Is that true? Sarah continued restocking gauze into the cart, unhurried, her expression carefully unreadable. I used to do a lot of things before I became a nurse, she said simply. None of that mattered last night. What mattered was Danny needed pressure on a wound, and his brother needed someone to talk to instead of at. That's all it was. But the agent, he called you, he was mistaken, Sarah said, not unkindly, closing the subject with the same gentle firmness she used to redirect a frightened patient's spiraling thoughts. People say strange things during high-stress situations. I'm sure you've noticed that yourself. Priya studied her a moment longer, clearly unconvinced, but something in Sarah's calm, immovable tone made pursuing it further feel somehow impolite, like prying open a door someone had quietly, deliberately closed. Dr. Holloway found her an hour later, updating a chart near the ER desk. Danny Reyes made it through surgery, he said. Stable condition. His brother's already asked about him twice from processing, apparently. Wanted someone to tell you thank you if you'd take it. Tell him I'm glad Danny's okay, Sarah said, not looking up from the chart. That's enough. Holloway lingered, the way people did when they sensed there was more beneath a conversation than what was being offered. You saved a lot of people in that lobby, Sarah, maybe more than you'll ever get credit for. Credit's not really the point, she said, finally meeting his eyes, something quiet and worn but steady behind them. The point is Danny gets to go home eventually. That little girl gets to forget this happened by the time she's in high school. That's enough credit for one night. He nodded slowly, recognizing perhaps for the first time that the woman in front of him carried more history than her file. 3 years of steady, unremarkable service had ever suggested. He didn't ask further. Some people, he understood, preferred their stories stay half-told. That afternoon, a plain envelope arrived at the nurse's station, addressed simply to S. Mitchell. Inside, a single handwritten note, no letterhead, no signature beyond initials. Some debts don't need repaying out loud. Thank you for what you did, then and last night. D.C. Sarah read it once, folded it carefully, and slid it into her locker without a word to anyone. She didn't need the acknowledgement. She had spent years building a life specifically so she wouldn't need it. A life measured in small kindnesses and quiet competence rather than medals or titles. In patients who slept a little easier because her hands were steady, not because anyone knew what those hands had once been trained to do. By evening, the hospital had returned fully to its ordinary rhythm. Sarah moved through her rounds exactly as she always had, checking charts, adjusting IV drips, speaking softly to frightened patients in the particular tone that made panic loosen its grip. Nobody watching her would have guessed from the outside that anything about her had changed. And in truth, nothing had. She had simply, for one night, allowed a small piece of who she used to be to surface long enough to do what needed doing, and then, just as deliberately, let it settle back beneath the surface where it belonged. At 9 p.m., her shift ended. She clocked out, gathered her coat, and walked out through the same lobby doors that had, less than a day before, been kicked open in violence. Outside, the evening was calm, unremarkable, indistinguishable from 1,000 others. Sarah Mitchell walked home the way she always did, quietly, unnoticed, carrying a strength no one around her fully understood, and needing, for now, no one to. The end.